What if the universe wasn't born from a silent, empty void, but from an act of cosmic murder? What if the sky you see every day isn't empty space, but the stretched-out, mutilated corpse of a divine mother, and the ground you walk on is her other half? This isn't a modern horror story. This is one of the oldest creation myths ever discovered, a story etched into clay tablets 4,000 years ago in ancient Mesopotamia. It's called the Enuma Elish, and according to this text, which predates the book of Genesis by 1,000 years, you and I, the entire human race, were created for a single terrifying purpose: to be slaves. Engineered as a cosmic underclass to serve the gods. The question is, why? What catastrophic event, what divine civil war, could have been so devastating that the gods needed to mass-produce a servant species to clean up the mess? The answer lies in a story of betrayal, monstrous revenge, and a war that literally tore the universe into being. Before time, before light, before anything had a name, there was nothing. Not a void of black space, but a swirling, formless chaos of water. There were only two entities, two primordial gods who were the chaos itself. The first was Apsu, the personification of fresh water, a vast, sweet ocean floating in the darkness. The second was Tiamat, the dragon mother of creation, the embodiment of the salty, chaotic sea. For eons they existed in this state, their waters mingling, coiling around each other in a silent, dreamlike eternity. They were everything and they were nothing. But in the place where the fresh water of Apsu met the salt water of Tiamat, something impossible happened. A reaction, a change. New beings began to take shape within the cosmic womb of their waters. These were the first children of the universe, the elder gods. First came Lamu and Lahamu, strange serpentine beings. Then came Anshar and Kishar, who represented the horizons of the sky and the earth. And from them came others. A new generation and then another. Each generation of these new gods was more defined, more complex, more vibrant than the last. They were beings of energy and sound, and for the first time the silent, dreaming cosmos was filled with noise. Imagine you've been asleep for eternity in perfect silence, and suddenly your children and grandchildren are having the loudest party imaginable, right in your bedroom. This was Apsu's reality. The new gods were full of life. They danced, they sang, they moved with boundless energy, creating ripples and waves throughout the placid body of their grandfather, Apsu. Their laughter and their shouting disturbed his eternal slumber. The universe was no longer a quiet, watery dream. It was a construction site. It was a playground. And Apsu, the old patriarch of the void, couldn't stand it. The noise gnawed at him. It was a violation of the perfect, silent order he had always known. He complained to Tiamat, his partner in creation. "Their ways have become loathsome to me," he seethed. "By day I can find no rest, and by night I cannot sleep. I will destroy them. I will wreck their ways so that silence may be restored." Apsu, the great father, had decided on the ultimate, unthinkable solution. He would murder his own descendants. All of them. He would erase the future to reclaim the silence of the past. To help him carry out this cosmic genocide, he turned to his vizier, his advisor, a lesser god named Mummu, who eagerly agreed, whispering poison in his ear and stoking the fires of his rage. But when Apsu presented his horrific plan to Tiamat, the great mother dragon was appalled. He expected her to share his frustration, to join him in his murderous plot. But Tiamat, for all her chaotic power, was still a mother. She recoiled in horror. "How could we destroy that which we ourselves have brought into being?" she cried. "Their ways are indeed troublesome, but let us be patient and bear with them." In this moment, Tiamat is not the monster she will later become. She is the protector, the matriarch trying to hold her fracturing family together, pleading with her enraged husband not to commit an atrocity. But her pleas were in vain. Apsu and Mummu were resolved. The conspiracy was set in motion. The younger gods, however, were not deaf. Word of their grandfather's plot reached them, and a wave of terror washed over their divine assembly. They were paralyzed by fear. Their creator, their own ancestor, was coming to unmake them. Who could possibly stand against the primordial power of Apsu, the father of all? They fell into despair, believing their vibrant new world was doomed to be dissolved back into silent, watery chaos. But one among them did not despair. One god was listening, thinking, and planning. His name was Ea, the god of wisdom, intellect, and magic. While the others panicked, who was perfect in skill and wise beyond comprehension, saw a path to victory. He knew he could not match his grandfather's raw brute force. Apsu was an ocean. Trying to fight him head-on would be like punching a tsunami. So Ie decided to fight not with strength but with cunning. He would use the one weapon Apsu did not possess: a brilliant strategic mind. Ie crafted a masterpiece of magic. He wove a spell, not of destruction but of profound absolute stillness. A sacred incantation designed to disarm the very concept of aggression. He went out to confront his grandfather, but not for a battle. He recited his spell, and the magical words washed over Apsu, calming the raging waters of his anger, soothing his murderous intent. The great god's eyes grew heavy. His will to destroy dissolved into a deep, irresistible drowsiness. Apsu, the great father of the universe, fell into an enchanted coma, a magical sleep so deep that he was utterly helpless. And in that moment of vulnerability, the god of wisdom, committed the first murder in history. He took his grandfather's crown, stripping him of his sovereignty. He severed his divine sash, ending his reign. And then he killed the sleeping god. He dismantled the primordial father and imprisoned the co-conspirator, Mummu. With this single brutal act of patricide, the old order was shattered. The rebellion was over. A new generation had seized control of the cosmos. To commemorate his victory, Ie built his home, his sanctuary, directly upon the watery corpse of his vanquished grandfather. It was a powerful statement. The new era of order, intellect, and structure would be built literally upon the foundations of the defeated chaos. And it was here, in this new palace built on the body of Apsu, that Ie and his wife Damkina brought a new life into the universe. A son was born, but this was no ordinary child. This was a god destined to rule all other gods. His name was Marduk. From the moment he was created, it was clear he was different. He was a god of gods, a divine prodigy. His father had made him perfect. He was given double the divinity, twice the power of any other. He had 4 eyes that could see everything in the universe at once, and 4 massive ears that could hear every whisper across creation. When he spoke, it wasn't with the voice of an infant, but with a torrent of fire that blazed from his mouth. He was larger, stronger, and more brilliant than any being that had come before. He was the ultimate weapon, a new kind of power born from the ashes of the universe's first war. And as the news of this new superpowered god spread, his grieving grandmother, the great dragon Tiamat, began to stir in her salty depths. Her husband was dead, her children were celebrating, and a new champion had been born to her enemies. Her period of patience was over. Her rage was beginning to boil. And this was not the quiet, simmering anger of a pot left on the stove. This was the flash boil of an ocean thrown into a volcano. Tiamat, the mother of all, the glistening salty sea from which all life had sprung, decided that her children were a mistake, a failed experiment, an unbearable noise that had to be silenced permanently. But grief, when it festers, can curdle into something far more dangerous. It can become a purpose. And Tiamat found her purpose not in creating, but in uncreating. She would scour the universe clean of her descendants. She would return everything to the silent, watery chaos that existed in the beginning. She didn't just want revenge. She wanted to unmake creation itself. To lead her armies, she promoted one of her own children, a god named Kingu. She took him as her new husband, her champion, her second in command. She elevated him above all the other gods, promising him ultimate authority. And to seal this dark pact, she gave him the one object that could make it a reality, the Tablet of Destinies. Think of the Tablet of Destinies as the universe's source code. It wasn't just a record of what was or what is. It was a tool that decreed what will be. To hold it was to hold legitimate, undeniable authority over the cosmos. The fates themselves were written upon it. By placing this tablet on Kingu's chest, Tiamat wasn't just making him a general. She was making him the legal cosmic authority of the new order she planned to install, an order of absolute, silent darkness. With her new king consort at her side, Tiamat began to spawn a new kind of offspring, not gods of light and order, but monsters born of rage and chaos. She brought forth a legion of horrors, an army of nightmares to unmake the world. She spawned colossal, venomous dragons, their scales shimmering with abyssal light. She created the Lamu, hairy, monstrous giants. She birthed the Yugalu, terrifying lion demons that walked like men, their roars shaking the foundations of reality. She made the Uridemu, savage, rabid dogmen, and the Gertablulu scorpionmen whose sting was death, whose gaze was terror. One by one, she filled her court with an unspeakable host. The Kululu fishmen who could swim through the earth as easily as water, the Kuzuriku fearsome bullmen, and above them all she created 3 of the most feared creatures in all of mythology. The Meshusu, a scaly dragon snake with the horns of a goat, the neck and head of a serpent, the 4 legs of a lion and the hind legs of an eagle. She spawned the Basmu, a great horned serpent, and the Usumgalu, a dragon king, a primordial terror. 11 monstrous, slavering, bloodthirsty children, forged not from love but from pure, distilled hatred. She armed them with irresistible weapons and made them ready for a war that would not end in surrender, only in total annihilation. Meanwhile, among the younger gods, the party was still going. They were celebrating their victory, hailing Ea as their champion, completely unaware of the storm gathering in the deep. It was the god Gaga, a vizier and messenger, who first brought the news. He traveled to the halls of the younger gods, his face pale with terror. He described the horrors he had seen. He told them of Kingu's promotion. He spoke of the Tablet of Destinies. And he listed, one by one, the 11 monstrous champions Tiamat had spawned to wipe them from existence. The celebration died. The music stopped. The laughter turned to ash in their mouths. Panic erupted. This wasn't some grumpy old grandfather they were dealing with anymore. This was the primordial mother of the universe, the vast, chaotic ocean, and she had declared total war. What do you do when your own grandmother, the source of your very being, declares war on existence? Their first thought was to turn to the hero who had saved them before. The clever, wise god of magic and water, who had so easily dispatched Apsu with a simple sleeping spell. Surely, he could reason with Tiamat. Or, if not reason, then outsmart her as he had her husband. Soa, filled with the confidence of his last victory, went to face the Great Mother. He prepared his spells, his incantations, his clever words. But the moment he approached her, all of that confidence evaporated. He wasn't standing before a grumpy old god. He was standing before a living ocean of pure, focused rage. He saw the 11 monsters arrayed behind her, their eyes glowing with malice. He saw Kingu, wearing the Tablet of Destinies on his chest, pulsing with cosmic power. He saw Tiamat herself, no longer a passive sea but a churning, roaring tempest of divine fury. Her power was a physical thing, a crushing weight that stopped his magic before it could even form on his lips. His words died in his throat. His courage shattered. The great champion turned and fled. He didn't even try to fight. He simply ran, returning to the other gods with a message of absolute despair. She was unstoppable. Her rage was too great, her power too immense. The gods were thrown into a deeper panic. If Ea, the cleverest among them, couldn't even face her, what hope did they have? Their terror-stricken eyes then turned to another great power. Anu, the god of the sky, father to many of them. He was older, more respected, a figure of supreme authority. Perhaps his paternal words could calm her maternal rage. Anu agreed to try. He was their king, their patriarch. It was his duty. He journeyed to the edge of her chaotic waters, preparing a speech of reconciliation and peace. But like Ea, the closer he got, the more he felt the sheer, overwhelming force of her hatred. It was a hurricane of emotion that physically pushed him back. He saw her monstrous children snarling, eager for battle. He saw the raw, untamable power radiating from her form. She wasn't a god to be reasoned with. She was a force of nature, a cosmic catastrophe about to happen. Anu, the great sky father, lord of the heavens, did the same thing Ea did. He turned back. He fled before her terrible majesty, his authority rendered meaningless. He returned to the assembly of the gods, his head bowed in failure. Their 2 greatest champions, the god of wisdom and the god of the heavens, had both been utterly defeated without a single blow being struck. They had been repelled by her aura alone. Now true despair set in. There was no one left. No one strong enough, no one brave enough. They were trapped. Awaiting them was an army of nightmares led by a king with the power of fate itself, all commanded by a furious mother goddess whose only goal was to wipe the universe clean of their existence. The end of all things seemed not just likely, but inevitable. The gods huddled together in the darkness, their brief moment of celebration now a bitter memory, as they waited for the roar of the coming storm and the gnashing of monstrous teeth. And in that silence, broken only by the shuddering of the cosmos, the true nature of Tiamat's rage became known. This was not merely anger. This was a holy war. A mother's vengeance, twisted into a cosmic crusade. She, the bearer of all things, had become the uncreator, the devourer. She fashioned a host of 11 monstrous beings, horrors born from the darkest waters of chaos. There were venomous serpents with fangs that dripped acid, scorpion men whose gaze could turn a god to dust, and fearsome lion demons whose roars could shatter the firmament. These were her new children, an army of nightmares given form and purpose. And to lead them, to be her champion and her new consort, she elevated a minor god named Kingu. She took from her own being the tablet of destinies, the divine instrument that decreed the fate of the universe itself, and she fastened it to Kingu's breast. With this single act, she declared him the supreme ruler, the new king of the gods. His word was now law. His command was now destiny. The very fabric of reality was now pledged to her cause. The message was unambiguous. There would be no negotiation. There would be no surrender. There would be only annihilation. The news of this unholy coronation, of this monstrous army, reached the huddled gods. It was Ea the ever-watchful who brought the tidings. His usual cleverness was gone, replaced by a stark, cold terror. He spoke to his grandfather, Anshar, the patriarch of their divine line, his voice hollow. The gods were paralyzed. They had celebrated their own existence, and in doing so, had awakened the wrath of existence itself. They looked at one another, but no one spoke. No one offered a plan. Who could possibly stand against the primordial mother, armed with monsters and destiny itself? Silence reigned. A heavy, suffocating silence that was worse than any scream. It was Anshar who finally broke it. He was old, ancient even by the standards of gods, and his voice carried the weight of eons. He looked at his children and grandchildren, at their fear-struck faces, and he knew that their inaction would be their doom. He turned to his son Anu, the great god of the sky. Anu, whose domain was the vast, ordered heavens above. He was powerful, majestic, a being of immense authority. Anshar commanded him, "Go, my son. Go and stand before Tiamat. Let your presence pacify her. Let your words soothe her great heart." Anu, ever the dutiful son, agreed. He took up his divine weapons and began the long journey into the abyss, toward the churning heart of chaos where Tiamat now dwelt. As he traveled, the ordered cosmos he knew began to fray at the edges. The darkness grew thicker, the silence more menacing. He could feel her power, a pressure building against his very being. A force of pure, undiluted creation turned to the purpose of destruction. He pressed on, his resolve firm. He was a new lord of the heavens. Surely he could reason with her. But then he saw her. He saw the great dragon mother, her form so vast it blotted out the void. He saw the 11 monsters arrayed before her, their shapes shifting and writhing in the gloom. He saw Kingu, puffed up with stolen authority, the tablet of destinies pulsing with a malevolent light on his chest. And he felt the full, unbridled force of Tiamat's hatred wash over him. It wasn't a sound or a sight, but a feeling, a certainty of utter and complete annihilation. Her will was absolute. Her rage was the new law of the universe. All his courage, all his authority, evaporated in an instant. He was no longer the lord of the heavens. He was a child standing before an impossibly angry parent. He didn't even try to speak. He knew with a certainty that chilled his immortal spirit that any word he uttered would be his last. He turned. He fled. He didn't slow his pace until he was back in the safety of the celestial court, collapsing before his father Anshar, his face pale, his voice a choked whisper. "I cannot," he stammered. "Her power, it is too great. Her face is death. I cannot face her." A new wave of despair washed over the assembled gods. If Anu, the mighty sky god, could not even approach her, what hope did any of them have? Anshar was furious. He raged at his son's cowardice, but his anger was just a mask for his own growing fear. He turned his gaze upon the one who had started it all. Enuma, the clever one, the god of wisdom and magic, who had put Apsu to sleep and built his home upon the corpse of the father. "You," Anshar commanded, his voice shaking with a mix of hope and desperation. "You were the one who faced Apsu. You were the one who bound him with your spells. Go now. Use your incantations. Use your magic. You are our wisest. Go and quell the storm you helped to create. I felt the weight of every god's stare upon him. He had been a hero once. His cleverness had saved them all. Perhaps it could again. He gathered his resolve, recalling the powerful spells, the sacred words of power that could bend reality to his will. He was not a warrior like Anu, but his mind was the sharpest weapon in creation. He set out on the same dark path his brother had taken, descending into the roiling chaos. He moved with stealth and caution, his magic weaving a cloak of silence around him. He felt the same oppressive, crushing power that had sent Anu fleeing, but he was not deterred. He understood the deep magic of the world. He believed he could find a weakness, a flaw in Tiamat's rage that he could exploit. He crept closer, peering through the veils of darkness, preparing the first syllables of a mighty binding spell. And then, just as Anu had, he saw her. He saw the sheer, cosmic scale of her fury, but he saw something more. He saw the source of her power. It wasn't just her own primordial strength. It was Kingu. It was the tablet of destinies. By giving the tablet to another, Tiamat had done something unexpected. She had focused her infinite, chaotic rage into a single, unassailable point of order. Her war now had a logic. It had a decree. It was destiny. His mind, his greatest asset, reeled. How do you outwit fate itself? How does a spell bind a future that has already been written on the divine tablet? He realized, in a moment of dreadful clarity, that his magic was useless. His words of power were just whispers against a hurricane. To even attempt his spell would be to challenge destiny itself, an act of supreme folly that would see him unmade in an instant. The creator of the plan had no plan. The master of magic was powerless. Just like his brother before him, turned back. He returned to the assembly of the gods, his head bowed not in cowardice, but in utter defeat. He stood before Anshar and spoke, his voice heavy with the finality of their doom. Her will is now the law of the universe. Her champion Kingu holds destiny in his hands. My magic, my wisdom, it is nothing. We cannot win. No one can face her. The gods fell silent once more. But this was a different silence. The first had been born of fear. This was the silence of the tomb. They had sent their mightiest warrior, and he had fled. They had sent their wisest magician, and he had been defeated without a single word spoken. Their two greatest champions had failed. There was no one left. The army of monsters would come. Tiamat would unmake the world. And all they could do was sit in the dark and wait for the end. The great experiment of creation was over. But as the last embers of hope died in the hearts of the elder gods, a quiet voice spoke from the back of the assembly. It was Ea, his eyes holding a strange new light. He spoke of his son, a new god, a young god born in the heart of the Apsu, a god with 4 eyes and 4 ears, who could see all things and hear all things, a god whose heart was a raging fire, whose strength was already greater than any of them could imagine. He spoke of a god named Marduk. Marduk, the name hung in the air, a promise and a threat. He was a god built for a new age, a god of storms and creation, born from the cleverness of Ea and the womb of Damkina. His grandfather, Anu, the god of the heavens, was utterly captivated. He saw in Marduk not just a grandson, but the pinnacle of their divine evolution. Anu crafted for him the 4 winds, toys for a godchild. The north wind, the south wind, the east wind, the west wind. He gave them to Marduk to command, to shape, to play with. But what does a godchild do for fun? He doesn't just blow bubbles. He creates dust storms. He summons whirlwinds. He unleashes tempests that churn the very fabric of existence. And where did he play with these new toys? In the vast cosmic ocean that was Tiamat. His winds, powerful and relentless, tore across her surface. They whipped her silent waters into a furious froth. They plunged into her depths, disturbing the quiet darkness where she still mourned the loss of her beloved Apsu. For the younger gods, this was just the boisterous energy of their new champion. For Tiamat, it was a violation. It was a constant, agonizing reminder of the chaos that had killed her husband. The peace she had sought in her grief was shattered, replaced by the howling gales of Marduk's play. The other gods, the ones who had sided with Apsu, who resented Ea's victory and the rise of this new generation, saw their opportunity. They were the forgotten ones, the ones who preferred the silent, unchanging darkness of the beginning. They saw Tiamat's growing agitation not as grief, but as a weapon waiting to be aimed. They slithered into her dark waters, whispering poison in her ear. "Do you not see?" they hissed. "They celebrate while you grieve. They create a god whose very existence is an insult to Apsu's memory. His storms are a dance upon your husband's grave. They give us no rest. We cannot sleep in this endless tempest. You, Mother Tiamat, you are the beginning of all things. Are you to be tormented by your own offspring? Will you let the murder of your consort go unavenged?" They fanned the embers of her sorrow until they became a raging inferno. The memory of Apsu, once a source of quiet pain, was now a call to war. Her love curdled into a monstrous, all-consuming hatred. The mother of all, the source of all life, now decided to become the end of all things. She would have her revenge. She would unmake the world. And so Tiamat, the shining primordial sea, began to change. Her creative power, the very force that had brought forth the gods, was twisted into a horrifying new purpose. She began to create monsters. Not gods born of light and order, but abominations born of rage and chaos. She spawned a legion of horrors, things that should not be, giving them form in her dark depths. She brought forth the viper with venom for blood, the dragon cloaked in an aura of terror, the lamahiro, a hairy bestial giant of immense strength. She created the great lion, the mad dog, and the scorpion man whose gaze was death. The demons, savage storm beasts, and the fishmen and the bullmen, all bearing merciless weapons, all unafraid of battle. An army of nightmares, 11 monstrous kinds in all, ready to tear down the new world and drag it back into primordial silence. But an army, even a monstrous one, needs a general. It needs a leader to channel its fury. Tiamat surveyed her children, both the old and the new. Her eyes fell upon a god named Kingu. He was one of the firstborn, one of those who had whispered venom in her ear, urging her towards war. She saw in him a reflection of her own rage. She elevated him above all others. She made him her new consort, taking the place of her murdered Apsu. She called him the commander of her armies. And to seal his authority, to grant him power absolute, she gave him the most sacred and powerful object in all of creation, the Tablet of Destinies. This was no mere object. The Tablet of Destinies was the universe's source code. Whoever held it could decree what was, what is, and what will be. Their word became reality. Their command became fate. Tiamat fastened it to Kingu's breast and declared, "Your command will be undeniable. Your word will be law. With this you will have dominion over all the gods." Kingu, once a minor deity, was now the supreme commander of a nightmare army, armed with the power to rewrite reality itself. He was Tiamat's chosen champion, her instrument of vengeance. The preparations were made in secret, in the churning black depths of the cosmic ocean. But secrets among gods are as fleeting as mist. Word began to spread. A rumor, a whisper, a chilling premonition. The wise and ever watchful was the first to learn the full, horrifying truth. He learned of Tiamat's transformation from grieving mother to goddess of war. He learned of the 11 species of monsters she had spawned. He learned that she had raised Kingu to be her champion, and most terrifying of all, that she had given him the Tablet of Destinies. A was paralyzed by fear. This was not a problem his magic or his cleverness could solve. Apsu had been a simple threat, a singular god who wanted to kill them in their sleep. This was different. This was their mother. This was the source of all life, now bent on total annihilation, armed with an army of nightmares and a general who held fate itself in his hands. He ran to his father, Anshar, the patriarch of the gods. He told him everything. He described the monstrous army, the demons and scorpion men. He explained the terrifying power Tiamat had bestowed upon Kingu. When Anshar heard this, he slapped his thigh in anguish and bit his lip in fury. A deep, profound terror settled over the younger gods. The boisterous confidence they had felt with Marduk's birth evaporated, replaced by the cold dread of their impending doom. They had killed their father, and now their mother, the most powerful being in existence, was coming for them. And she was not coming alone. She was bringing an army of horrors, and the fate of the universe was on her side. Tiamat, the mother of all, the shimmering sea of chaos from which all life had sprung, was no longer a creator. She was a destroyer. Her grief over Apsu had curdled, festering in the cosmic silence until it became a singularity of pure rage. This wasn't just anger. This was a mother's fury, a force of nature more potent than any storm, more absolute than any darkness. The very fabric of existence shuddered with her sorrow. The younger gods, the Anunnaki, could feel it. They felt her gaze upon them from across the void, and it was not the warm, life-giving gaze they had once known. It was cold, sharp, and promised only oblivion. How do you fight your own mother? The one who gave you form and substance? It was a paralyzing, unthinkable horror. Her transformation wasn't entirely her own doing. Other primordial beings, ancient gods who had watched the rise of the younger generation with resentment, saw their chance. They slithered up to Tiamat in her mourning, whispering poison into her ear. They reminded her of Apsu's fate. They painted her children not as vibrant new life, but as arrogant, patricidal usurpers. They murdered your husband, they hissed. They dance on his grave and mock your tears. Are you, the mother of all, truly so weak that you will let this stand? Rise up, Tiamat. Avenge your beloved. Let them feel the wrath of the one they have wronged. And the whispers worked. The final threads of her maternal instinct snapped. The shimmering ocean of creation began to boil. From the depths of her being, Tiamat began to weave. Not life, but its opposite. She began to create an army. But this wasn't an army of gods. It was an arsenal of nightmares, a menagerie of abominations designed for one purpose: to unmake her own children. From her own chaotic essence, she spawned 11 monstrosities, each one a perversion of the natural order. She brought forth monstrous vipers and dragons, their scales like hardened obsidian, their fangs dripping with a venom that could dissolve reality itself. She created the Lamu, hairy, savage giants of immense strength. She birthed the Yugalu, lion demons with the feet of eagles, whose roars could shatter mountains. There were scorpion men, whose sting brought a fate worse than death, and fishmen and bullmen, each more terrifying than the last. These were not creatures of passion or purpose like the younger gods. They were living weapons, empty of all but Tiamat's will to destroy. They were cosmic horror given flesh. But an army, even an army of nightmares, needs a general. And for this role, Tiamat chose one of her own sons. His name was Kingu. He was not the cleverest, nor the strongest of her first children, but he was the most ambitious, and the most loyal to her now. She elevated him above all his brothers, taking him as her new consort, her chosen champion. She promised him dominion over all the gods, the throne of the universe itself. And to seal this pact, to grant him the authority to carry out her vengeance, she gave him the single most powerful object in existence, the Tablet of Destinies. This wasn't just a symbol of power. The Tablet of Destinies was the universe's source code. It was the operating system of reality. Whoever held it could decree what was, what wasn't, and what would be. The laws of physics, the flow of time, the fate of every being, divine or otherwise, it was all written there. By placing it on Kingu's chest, Tiamat wasn't just making him a general, she was making him the new arbiter of fate. He now had the ultimate authority, the divine right to rule, granted by the primordial mother herself. With the tablet, his commands were no longer mere words, they were absolute law. The news of this unholy alliance, of this army of horrors and Kingu's ascension, swept through the divine realms like a shockwave. The Anunnaki fell into a panic. This was no longer just a grieving mother. This was a declaration of total war, a war they could not possibly win. Their own father, Anu, the god of the sky, trembled on his throne. Their wisest brother, the one who had defeated Apsu, was struck silent with dread. Feeling the weight of his past actions, knew he had to be the one to face her. He had started this by killing their father. Perhaps he could reason with their mother. He gathered his courage, armed himself with powerful incantations, and journeyed toward Tiamat's throne. But the closer he got, the more her fury washed over him. It was a tangible force, a crushing wave of pure hatred that eroded his will, unraveled his magic. He saw the 11 monsters arrayed before her, their eyes burning with cold fire. He saw Kingu, wearing the Tablet of Destinies like a breastplate, radiating an authority that dwarfed his own. Before he could even speak, Tiamat's rage slammed into him, and he, the clever, the powerful, the slayer of Apsu, turned and fled in absolute terror. He didn't even try to fight. He just ran. He returned to the other gods, breathless and pale, his spirit broken. "It's hopeless," he told them. "Her power, it's absolute. Her hatred has remade her into something invincible." Panic turned to despair. If they couldn't face her, who could? They turned to Anu, the Sky Father, the highest among them in rank and stature. They begged him to go, to use his authority as the patriarch to calm their mother. Anu, seeing the fear in his children's eyes and knowing his duty, agreed. He took the path to Tiamat's court, determined to sue for peace. But he fared no better than Ea. As he approached, he felt the oppressive weight of her cosmic wrath. He saw the legions of monsters. He saw Kingu, empowered by the tablet, sneering at him. Anu's courage evaporated. The king of the heavens, the great Sky Father, turned his back and fled without uttering a single word. He returned to the Anunnaki and simply shook his head. The message was clear. There would be no negotiation. There would be no surrender. There was only war and annihilation. The gods were utterly broken. Their two greatest champions had been defeated by fear alone. They huddled together in their celestial halls, the sounds of their celebration now replaced with whimpers of terror. They were trapped. They couldn't fight and they couldn't run. Tiamat's monstrous army was mobilizing, a tide of cosmic horror preparing to sweep across the universe and wash away everything they had built. Kingu, with the Tablet of Destinies, was rewriting their fates, scripting their destruction into the very laws of reality. The Anunnaki were leaderless, hopeless, and staring into the abyss. Their brief, bright rebellion was about to be extinguished by the very source from which they came. All they could do was wait for the end. Who could possibly stand against a foe like this? Who could challenge a primordial goddess leading an army of nightmares, whose champion held the source code to the universe itself? They needed a hero, a champion willing to do what their fathers could not, a god willing to face down their own creator. And as they sat in the growing darkness, paralyzed by fear, a new name began to be whispered among them. A young god, a new god, one who was not like the others, one who was born of the wind, full of storm and fury. His name was Marduk, born not in the silent depths like the first gods, but in the heart of the sacred. He was the son of Ea, the god of wisdom, and Damkina, the goddess of the earth. And from the moment of his birth, it was clear he was different. He was more. His father had crafted him to be perfect, a masterpiece of divine engineering. The tablet says he was exalted above them all. Where other gods had 2 eyes, Marduk had 4, allowing him to see everything in all directions at once. Where they had 2 ears, he had 4, so that he could hear every whisper, every plot, every prayer across the cosmos. When he spoke, it wasn't just words that came out, it was fire. A searing flame that could scorch the unworthy. He was taller, stronger, more brilliant than any god who had come before. He was the future, a walking, breathing storm of potential. But he was also young and arrogant. While the older gods sat in their halls, paralyzed with fear, Marduk was out playing with the winds, his creations. He would gather the 4 winds, the north, south, east, and west, and craft them into whirlwinds and dust storms, unleashing them for his own amusement. This divine roughhousing wasn't just for fun. It was practice. It was a young god testing the limits of his power. But his games had consequences. The churning winds he created stirred the dark waters of Tiamat, disturbing her slumber, agitating her rage. It was like a child repeatedly poking a sleeping dragon, and this only fueled her apocalyptic fury. Back in the celestial halls, the gods heard the roaring of Tiamat's new army, the monstrous forms of the 11 creatures she had spawned. They felt the darkness closing in. Their champion Anu had failed. Their previous champion Ea had failed. They had power, they had weapons, but they had no will, no courage. What good is a sword if no one dares to wield it? It was Anshar, the old king, father of Anu, who sat on his throne, his face a mask of despair. He looked at his assembled children, the Anunnaki, the great gods, and saw only terror in their eyes. He slapped his thigh in frustration, a sign of utter helplessness. He gnashed his teeth, his royal composure shattered. Who could possibly stand against the mother of all things? And then Ea, the god of wisdom, the one who always had a plan, stepped forward. He had been silent for a long time, perhaps shamed by his own failure to appease Tiamat. But he had not been idle. He had been watching his son. He knew Marduk's power, his ambition, his lack of the crippling fear that had seized all the others. He approached Anshar and spoke of a new hope. He spoke of his son. The gods, desperate for any solution, summoned the young god. Marduk strode into the assembly hall. and the effect was immediate. He didn't carry the weight of their fear. He didn't have the centuries of tradition and caution holding him back. He was pure, untamed power. His fiery breath, his all-seeing eyes, his sheer presence filled the room. The old gods, for the first time, felt a flicker of something other than terror. It was a dangerous, thrilling spark of hope. Anshar, the king, looked at this magnificent, terrifying young god and laid the situation bare. He told him of Tiamat's rage, of the army of monsters she had created. He described Kingu, her new consort, now wearing the Tablet of Destinies, wielding the power to command reality itself. He told Marduk of their failed attempts, of their cowering fear. And then he made the offer. "Go," he said. "Go and face Tiamat. Avenge us. Capture her, destroy her monsters, and bring us peace. If you do this, your command will be second to none." Marduk listened. He looked at the faces of these ancient, powerful beings, now reduced to desperate beggars. He saw their fear, but he also saw his opportunity. This wasn't just a crisis. This was a power vacuum, and Marduk intended to fill it. He stood before them, a giant among his elders, and he smiled. A smile that was both reassuring and deeply unsettling. He agreed to be their champion. He would face the primordial sea dragon. He would take on her 11 monsters. He would confront Kingu and reclaim the Tablet of Destinies. But there was a condition. His price was not just victory or glory. His price was everything. He looked directly at Anshar, the king of the gods, and laid out his terms. His voice, laced with the crackle of fire, echoed in the silent hall. "If I, your avenger, am to vanquish Tiamat and save your lives," he declared, "then you must convene a special assembly. You must proclaim my destiny supreme, above all others." He wasn't asking to be their champion. He was demanding to be their king. "When you gather in the hall of assembly, ready to pass your decrees," he continued, "let my word and mine alone determine the fates. Whatever I create, let it be unchangeable. Whatever I command, let it be unaltered. My decree from this day forward will be absolute. No god shall have the power to revoke it." This was a coup. A bloodless, perfectly executed coup d'état. He was telling the old guard, the established order, that their time was over. He would save them, yes, but in return they would hand him the keys to the entire universe. They would effectively make themselves obsolete. They would be trading one monster for another, a chaotic external monster for a calculating internal one. The gods were stunned into silence. This was unthinkable. The cosmic order was built on a council, a system of checks and balances. What Marduk was demanding was absolute monarchy. Tyranny, some might have whispered. They were being asked to trade their freedom for their safety. It's a choice that has echoed down through human history, and here it is, right at the dawn of creation. What would you do? Face certain, agonizing destruction at the hands of a rage-filled goddess? Or hand over all your power to a young, untested, unbelievably arrogant upstart who promises salvation at the cost of your sovereignty? For the gods, the choice was simple. Annihilation was not an option. Anshar, realizing this was their only path, sent his vizier, Gaga, to summon the oldest of the gods, Lamu and Lahamu, the first children of Tiamat and Apsu. Gaga went before them and laid out the entire desperate situation. Tiamat's war, the failure of their champions, and now Marduk's audacious proposal. He explained the ultimatum. Either they make Marduk their absolute sovereign, or they all perish. When Lamu and Lahamu heard this, they and all the other gods cried out in anguish. What a bitter choice! To be saved, they had to surrender their very essence, their power to shape their own destinies. But faced with the alternative, they agreed. And so they gathered. All the great gods, the makers of destiny, came together in the grand assembly hall. They prepared a magnificent feast, a coronation banquet. They ate bread, they drank wine, and the sweet intoxication made them forget their fears, made them bold. They were ready to make their deal with the devil they knew, to escape the dragon they couldn't face. In a great ceremony, they constructed a royal throne for Marduk. They brought him to the front of the assembly, and god by god, they paid him homage. They looked upon the young storm god and declared, "You are the most honored among the great gods. Your destiny is unequaled. Your command is absolute. From this day on, your decree shall be irrevocable. To exalt and to abase, this shall be in your hand. Your word shall be true. Your command shall be unimpeachable. But they needed a demonstration, a proof of concept. They needed to see if this power they were granting him was real. They placed a single constellation, a garment of stars, in the middle of the assembly. Lord, they said, let your word but destroy the constellation, and then with a second command let it be restored whole. Marduk opened his mouth, and with a single command, vanish, the constellation disappeared, winking out of existence as if it had never been. The gods gasped. Then he spoke again. Return. And instantly the starry garment reappeared, whole and perfect. Seeing this, the gods rejoiced. There was no more doubt. They had found their savior. They had found their king. They bowed down, chanting in unison, Marduk is king. Marduk is king. They handed him the royal scepter, the throne, and the ring of power. And then they gave him his weapons. Not just any weapons. They gave him an arsenal unlike any seen before. They gave him the 4 winds to bind, the 7 winds of destruction to command. They gave him the hurricane, the whirlwind, the untamable storm. They gave him a bow that shot lightning and a net that could encompass the world. They armed their new king for an apocalyptic war. They had made their choice, cast their lots, and placed the fate of the entire universe into the hands of a single ambitious god. As he stood before them, clad in terror, wielding the storm, they cheered. But under the celebration, a cold question lingered. In their desperation to defeat a monster, had they just created something far, far more powerful? The young gods had made their choice. They had crowned their champion. They had given a single ambitious god absolute authority, hoping he would be their salvation. And as Marduk, their newly minted king, turned to face the coming darkness, the very air crackled with a power the universe had never known. He was no longer just a god of storms. He was the storm itself, a living, breathing apocalypse, and he was about to be unleashed. His first act as sovereign was to arm himself, but these were not the weapons of a common god. He began with a bow, a weapon of his own design, and strung it. He knocked an arrow, a bolt of pure lightning, and let its tip hum with celestial energy. In his right hand he grasped his mace, a weapon that could shatter mountains. But his true arsenal was far more elemental, far more terrifying. He didn't just gather weapons. He gathered the very forces of nature. He summoned the 4 winds and stationed them at his side, not as servants, but as extensions of his will. The south wind, the north wind, the east wind, the west wind. These weren't gentle breezes. They were cosmic hurricanes, each a weaponized direction, ready to be unleashed to tear and disorient. Then he created new winds, malevolent and terrible. The whirlwind, the cyclone, and most fearsome of all, the 7th wind, the Imhalu, the evil wind. It was a gale of pure annihilation, a wind that carried no life, only an ending. He gathered these tempests, these 7 hurricanes of destruction, and placed them inside his divine net. A net forged not of rope, but of cosmic law and inescapable fate. His plan wasn't just to fight Tiamat. It was to contain chaos itself. Finally, he mounted his chariot, the Storm Chaser, a terrifying contraption that rode upon the gale, pulled by steeds named Slayer, Merciless, Fleet, and Flyer. Their mouths frothed with venom, their bodies crackled with lightning. Clad in an armor of divine radiance, his head crowned with a terrifying aura, Marduk rode out. He rode not towards a battle, but towards a reckoning. He set his course directly for the heart of chaos, directly for Tiamat. The primordial mother saw him coming. Her rage, which had been a simmering ocean, now became a tidal wave. She was surrounded by her own army, the 11 monsters she had birthed in fury, with Kingu, her new consort, at their head. When Marduk drew near, the 2 cosmic forces paused. The universe held its breath. Before the first blow was struck, the war began with words. Tiamat, her voice the grinding of tectonic plates, let out a shriek of rage and contempt. She accused him of being an arrogant child, a usurper, a murderer who had slain his own great-great-grandfather, Apsu. She taunted his youth, his audacity to challenge the one from whom all things came. It was a mother's scolding, amplified to the scale of the cosmos. But Marduk was unmoved. His voice, the crack of thunder, answered her rage with cold, hard logic. He threw her own crimes back in her face. He accused her of being a traitor to her own children, of plotting their destruction out of a twisted, selfish grief. He accused her of elevating Kingu, a mere subordinate, to a position of power he did not deserve, simply to wage her unjust war. He challenged her claim as the primordial mother, arguing that her actions were not of a creator, but of a destroyer. And then he laid down the ultimate challenge. He proposed single combat, just the two of them. Let the fate of the universe be decided not by armies, but by a duel between order and chaos. Tiamat lost control. Hearing her own dark plots laid bare, hearing this upstart god challenge her very essence, she flew into a blind primordial rage. She screamed, a sound that shook the foundations of reality. She cast a spell, a curse of ancient unknowable power. But Marduk was ready. This was the moment he had been waiting for. As she lunged forward, her mouth agape, a swirling vortex of teeth and claws ready to devour him, Marduk made his move. He didn't meet her charge with a charge of his own. He unfurled his net, the net of fate. It spread out, a shimmering web of divine law, and enveloped her. As she struggled against it, confused by this weapon that was more concept than object, Marduk unleashed his true power. He commanded the Mhulu, the evil wind, to attack. It wasn't a physical blow. It was something far worse. The gale of annihilation, the wind of absolute endings, rushed straight for Tiamat's open mouth. It surged down her throat, filling her lungs, her stomach, her entire being. She tried to close her mouth, but the storm was too powerful. She tried to scream, but her lungs were full of the tempest. Her body began to distend, to bloat, inflated from the inside out by the very essence of destruction. She was paralyzed, a prisoner within her own body, her immense power rendered useless. And in that moment of absolute helplessness, Marduk raised his bow. The lightning-tipped arrow hummed with potential. He took aim not at her head, not at her limbs, but directly at her heart. He let the arrow fly. It sliced through the cosmic waters, a streak of pure energy, and struck its target. The arrow didn't just pierce her heart, it split it in two. It sliced through her belly, extinguishing the chaotic life within her. The primordial mother, the source of all things, the raging ocean of chaos, was dead. Her shriek was cut short. Her vast body went limp, a continent of dead divinity floating in the void. When her generals, the 11 monsters, saw their queen fall, panic erupted. They turned to flee, to scatter back into the darkness from which they came. But there was no escape. Marduk's victory was not just about killing Tiamat. It was about establishing a new unbreakable order. He and the other gods fell upon them. They were captured, bound in chains, their power broken. Their monstrous weapons, which had caused such terror, were smashed into pieces. Marduk trampled them underfoot, a final act of dominance. But there was one more piece of business. Kingu, the consort, the promoted general, the one Tiamat had given the Tablet of Destinies. Marduk seized him. He didn't kill him, not yet. He did something far more significant. He ripped the Tablet of Destinies from Kingu's chest. This was the ultimate prize. The tablet was the divine right to rule, the celestial document that decreed how the universe functioned. It held the power of fate itself. By taking it, Marduk wasn't just a victor. He was the legitimate, undisputed ruler of reality. He pressed his own divine seal onto it, a stamp of new ownership, and placed it upon his own breast. The transfer of power was complete. The coup was successful. With the enemy army captured and the symbol of universal authority secured, Marduk returned to the scene of his great victory. He floated before the colossal, silent corpse of Tiamat. He stood upon her defeated form, a young king standing on the remains of the old world. He looked down at the vast, lifeless body, a canvas of cosmic potential. The war for creation was over. The battle against chaos had been won. But as he looked at the raw material of his defeated foe, a new thought began to form. He didn't see a monster to be discarded. He saw a foundation. He saw the sky. He saw the earth. The war was over, but the true work, the work of creation, was just about to begin. With the force of a cosmic sculptor, Marduk approached the colossal form of Tiamat. He took his mace, the very weapon that had ended the war, and used it not to destroy, but to divide. He sliced through her immense body, splitting her down the middle like a craftsman splitting a dried fish for display. This wasn't an act of malice, not a final desecration of his foe. It was an act of cosmic recycling, the most profound and ambitious construction project ever conceived. He took one half of her scaled, primordial body and with a heave of unimaginable strength, he raised it upwards. He stretched it taut, a great celestial canopy, and this became the sky, the firmament. But it wasn't just a roof. It was a barrier, a dam. He designed it to hold back the chaotic waters that still existed above it, the upper oceans of Tiamat that had not been part of her physical form. To ensure its integrity, he slid bolts into place, stationed guards, and commanded them to never let those waters leak through. He had contained one half of the chaos. Then he turned to the other half of the great dragon. He laid it down beneath his feet, shaping it, taming it. This became the earth. And just as the sky held back the upper waters, this foundation of earth was set over the Apsu, the freshwater ocean below, to hold its waters in check. The world, our world, was thus created as a fragile, livable bubble suspended between two infinite, hostile seas, one above and one below, both held at bay by the repurposed body of their former queen. But a canvas is not a masterpiece. It needed details. Marduk, now less a warrior and more an artist, began to work with the finer points of Tiamat's anatomy. From her head, he heaped up a great mountain, propping up the sky he had just created. Her eyes, once filled with rage, he pierced. And from them, two great rivers began to flow. In the east, the Tigris. In the west, the Euphrates. The very lifeblood of Mesopotamia was made to flow from the eyes of the defeated monster. The two great peaks that would one day be known as the Zagros Mountains? He formed those from her breasts. Nothing was wasted. From her saliva, Marduk fashioned the clouds, the fog, and the mist. He harnessed the poison that once filled her veins and transformed it into the life-giving rain and the dew of the morning. The raw materials of terror were being systematically repurposed into the ingredients of a temperate, habitable world. With the physical structure in place, Marduk turned his attention to a far more complex challenge: order. He didn't just want a world, he wanted a clock, a functioning, predictable, and eternal system. He looked up at the great dark canopy he had made and began to paint it with light. He established the constellations, assigning them their places and their paths. These weren't just random patterns of stars. He designated them as the celestial stations for the great gods, specific points in the heavens where the divine powers could reside and oversee the cosmos. He then defined the year, dividing it into 12 months, each with its own designated group of stars. He had created the zodiac. He set the length of the days and the nights. He built a great celestial gate on the eastern horizon for the sun to rise, and another on the western horizon for it to set, ensuring its path was fixed and unwavering. He didn't just create space, he created time. And to govern the night, to be the shepherd of the stars, he brought forth the moon. He gave it its crown and commanded it to illuminate the darkness, setting its phases to mark the passing of the weeks and the beginning of each new month. He gave it a specific set of instructions like a divine programmer writing the first code for the universe. At the beginning of the month, he decreed, "You shall shine with horns to mark 6 days. On the 7th show half a crown. When the sun has overtaken you on the horizon, wane and form again. You are the keeper of the calendar, the marker of all things." The universe now had its physics. It had its astronomy. It had its laws. It was a machine, and Marduk was its architect. The Anunnaki gods, who had watched this all in stunned silence, finally erupted in joyous praise. They had been freed from Tiamat's tyranny, and now they were citizens of a breathtakingly beautiful and orderly cosmos. But a king needs a capital. A god needs a temple. Marduk, looking down upon the world he had made, declared that there should be a place on earth that was a mirror image of his own celestial abode. A place where the gods could descend and mortals could ascend. A nexus point between heaven and earth. He called this place Babylon, which in their language meant the gate of the gods. And the other gods, filled with gratitude, immediately agreed. They would build it for him. For a full year they labored, forming bricks from the clay of the new earth, building a great ziggurat, a temple tower that reached towards the sky he had created. They built him a throne, a sanctuary, a home on the world he had birthed. When it was finished, they held a great banquet. They celebrated their freedom, their new home, and their new king. They officially bestowed upon Marduk the kingship of the universe. They praised his works, his wisdom, his power, and they began to honor him by reciting his 50 names, each one representing a different aspect of his power, a different one of his great deeds. He was no longer just Marduk, son of Ea. He was the Lord of the winds, the creator of grain, the giver of abundance, the light of the heavens. The universe was perfect. It was stable. It was complete. And yet, as the initial celebration died down, a new reality began to dawn on the gods. This perfect cosmos, it needed to be maintained. The stars needed to be guided on their paths. The rivers needed to be kept in their banks. The great celestial gates needed to be opened and closed for the sun each day. The winds needed to be directed. The universe was no longer a battlefield, but now it was a kingdom that required constant administration, a garden that required endless tending. A new kind of exhaustion began to set in, not the exhaustion of fear and war, but the exhaustion of eternal responsibility. The gods had been given their stations, their duties within this new cosmic bureaucracy, and it was work. It was toil. This perfect cosmos, this masterpiece of order they now inhabited, was a golden cage. They had been freed from slavery to Tiamat only to become servants to the system itself, and so they began to complain. They murmured to one another in the divine halls of Babylon. Who would maintain the celestial machinery? Who would provide the offerings and sacrifices needed to sustain the gods themselves? The great work of creation was done, but the endless labor of existence had just begun. The gods looked to their king Marduk with this new problem, a labor problem. And Marduk, ever the problem solver, looked back at the one remaining prisoner from the war, the one who had incited Tiamat to rage, who had led her armies, who had been named her new consort, the architect of the entire rebellion, Kingu. And in the blood of that treacherous god, Marduk saw one final, brilliant, and terrible solution. A solution not of stone or starlight, but of flesh and blood. A plan to solve a problem the gods hadn't even realized they had yet. Because with the cosmos set in order, with the heavens and the earth separated and the stars set in their courses, the real work began. The universe, it turned out, required constant upkeep. The great cosmic machine needed operators. The canals of the heavens needed digging, the foundations of the earth needed maintaining, and the gods themselves, the Anunnaki, were the ones tasked with the labor. For a time they toiled. They dredged the Tigris and the Euphrates in the heavens, they heaped up mountains, they bore the basket and the spade. But these were gods. They were born of primordial power, not for endless backbreaking work. They began to grumble. They complained. They burned their tools and surrounded the dwelling of their chief, Enlil, shouting in the divine night. They had overthrown one tyrant, Tiamat, only to be saddled with this eternal drudgery. Was this the prize for their victory? A universe of their own to manage forever? Marduk heard their cries. He, the great champion, the king of the gods, saw the discontent brewing. An unstable workforce of gods was just as dangerous as a raging sea monster. Order, his great obsession, was once again under threat, not from without but from within. He needed a permanent solution. He needed a new class of being, one designed for the very toil the gods now despised. He convened the great assembly, the council of all the gods, and he laid out his masterstroke. His voice boomed in the celestial chamber. "I have a plan," he declared. "I will create a new thing. I will bring into being a primitive worker. Man shall be his name." The gods listened, intrigued. "I will create a savage, a Lulu, and the drudgery of the gods shall be imposed upon him, so that they may finally be at ease." It was a breathtakingly audacious idea, to create life not as an afterthought, but as a workforce. To fashion a creature whose entire purpose was to serve. His father, the wise god Ea, stood by him, ready to provide the divine craftsmanship. But the raw materials, that was the question. To create this new being, they needed a divine element. They needed a sacrifice. Life could only come from life. A god would have to die. Marduk's gaze swept across the assembled deities. The question hung in the air, heavy and sharp. "Who?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. Was it that incited Tiamat? Who was it that marshaled her forces and stirred up the conflict? Who is responsible for this war? The gods looked at one another. There was no debate, no hesitation. A single name was uttered, a unified verdict from the divine jury. Kingu. They brought him forward, the failed consort, the general of a defeated army. He was bound, held before Ea and the great assembly. The charges were read against him. He was the instigator, the rebel, the one whose ambition had cost the universe its peace. They recounted his crimes, his promotion by Tiamat, his arrogance in accepting the tablet of destinies. He had sought to be the master of all, and now he was a prisoner with nothing. The verdict was swift. The sentence was death. But his death would not be a simple end. It would be a beginning. It was not merely punishment. It was creation. The great god Ea, the master of arts and magic, stepped forward to perform the terrible sacred task. Kingu was held down. His veins were severed, and as his divine blood, the life force of a treacherous god, flowed out and mixed it with the clay of the earth. Think of that. Think of the ingredients that make up humanity in this story. We are not forged from the light of a star or the breath of a benevolent creator. We are made from the mud of the earth and the blood of a traitor. Our very essence is a cocktail of ambition, rebellion, and divinity, bound to the soil. Our nature from the very first moment is a paradox. We are of the earth, yet our blood is from the heavens. We are servants, yet we carry within us the life force of the one who dared to challenge the supreme authority of the cosmos. And from that mixture of clay and traitor's blood, Ea fashioned the first human. He imposed upon this new creature the service of the gods, and in doing so, he set the gods free. The Anunnaki shouted for joy. They had been liberated from their labor. The universe was now in balance. The gods could oversee, and man would do the work. The cosmic hierarchy was complete. Marduk had done it. He had defeated chaos, structured the universe, and now he had solved the labor crisis. He had created a permanent underclass to maintain his creation. He assigned the gods to their various stations in the heavens and the underworld, 600 gods in all. 300 he stationed in the heavens above to guard his decrees, and 300 he placed on the earth below. Everything had its place. Everything had its purpose. The gods were overwhelmed with gratitude. They had promised Marduk a shrine, a home, a throne befitting his new station, and now they were eager to make good on their promise. "Before you were our beloved son," they declared. "But now you are our king. We will build you a home. We will build you a sanctuary where we can come and rest and listen to your commands." Marduk's face glowed with pleasure. He told them of his ultimate plan for this new sacred space. A place on the earth, a counterpart to their dwellings in the heavens. A place where the celestial and the terrestrial could meet. A city that would serve as the nexus of the universe, the capital of his new cosmic empire. "Build it," he commanded them. "Build Babylon. Build my great temple, the Asagila, so that it reaches to the heavens. Mold the bricks, raise the structure, and make it a dwelling for myself and for all the gods." The Anunnaki, the very gods who had just been freed from the burden of labor, now took up that labor again, but this time with joy and purpose. For 1 full year they molded the bricks. For a second year they raised the great ziggurat of the Asagila, the house with the lofty head, its peak striving to touch the sky. They were not just building a temple, they were building the physical center of the new world order. They were constructing the earthly throne for the king of the universe, a place where humanity would bring their offerings, where the gods would gather for their assemblies, and where the fate of the cosmos would be decided, forevermore, by the will of Marduk. And in this great city, at the foot of this great temple, they would establish the laws and rituals that would govern not just gods, but the new, fragile, and blood-soaked creatures they had just created to serve them. And so the new age began. An age defined by structure, by hierarchy, and by purpose. The universe was no longer a chaotic, swirling mess of potential. It was a kingdom, and it had a king. To solidify this new reality, the gods gathered in their magnificent new home in Babylon, the Asagila Temple, for one final crucial ceremony. They were there to formally bestow upon Marduk his full authority, to engrave his kingship into the very fabric of creation. They did this by proclaiming his 50 names. This wasn't just a list. Each name was a key unlocking a different aspect of his power, a different facet of his being. Each name was a divine decree, a transfer of authority from the old guard to the new champion. They called him Lugal-Dimarankia, king of the gods of heaven and earth, the title once held by Enlil. They were officially handing over the reins of the cosmos. They called him Asarluhi, the wielder of the incantation, the god of magical knowledge, inheriting the wisdom of his father Ea. They called him Tutu, the creator of renewal, the one who could purify and restore the sacred places. One by one the gods stepped forward, each proclaiming a name, each adding to the tapestry of Marduk's identity. He was the god who set the stars in their courses, the god who determined the fates, the god who held the winds, the god who provided abundance. With every name spoken, his power grew, his legitimacy cemented. He absorbed the functions of the older gods, becoming not just their leader, but their sum total. He was the ultimate god, the perfect synthesis of power, wisdom, and authority. The universe finally had a stable, unchallengeable center of gravity, and at the bottom of this divine pyramid, looking up in awe and terror, were the newly minted humans. Their purpose, woven from the blood of a traitor god, was brutally simple: work. They were to dig the canals, till the fields, build the temples, and offer the sacrifices. Their toil would feed and sustain the gods, freeing the divine beings to focus on the grand cosmic tasks of maintaining order. Your life as an ancient Babylonian was one of labor, but it was labor with a divine mandate. You weren't just farming to feed your family. You were farming to feed the gods. Your suffering, your sweat, your very existence was a service to the cosmos. It was a bleak worldview perhaps, but it was also one of profound meaning. It answered the fundamental human question: why are we here? The Mesopotamian answer was, to serve. Once the 50 names were decreed and humanity's purpose was set, the gods laid down one final instruction. They commanded that this story, this epic poem, the Enuma Elish, be remembered. It was to be recited, studied, and passed down through the generations. It was to be read aloud during the most important religious festival of the year, the Akitu, the Babylonian New Year. For 12 days, the entire city of Babylon would participate in rituals that reenacted Marduk's victory. The king himself would play a central role, reaffirming his divine right to rule as Marduk's chosen representative on earth. And this is where we peel back the final layer of the story, because the Enuma Elish is more than a creation myth. It is one of the most brilliant and successful pieces of political propaganda ever written. You see, for millennia before Babylon rose to prominence, the chief god of the Mesopotamian pantheon was a deity named Enlil. He was the god of wind, air, and earth. The older Sumerian and Akkadian myths all placed Enlil at the top, but around the 18th century BCE, the city of Babylon began to conquer its neighbors, forging a vast empire under kings like Hammurabi. An empire needs more than just an army. It needs a unifying story, a divine justification for its power. It wasn't enough for Babylon to be the strongest city on earth. It had to be the center of the universe. And so the priests of Babylon rewrote the cosmos. They took the ancient pre-existing stories, the primordial waters, the war among the gods, and they recast them with a new hero. They created the Enuma Elish to explain, theologically, why Marduk, the obscure patron god of their city, was now the undisputed king of the universe. The story systematically demotes the older, more established gods. Enlil is barely mentioned. Anu and Ea are shown to be powerless and fearful, stepping aside for the young, vigorous Marduk. The myth is a divine reflection of a terrestrial reality. Babylon had conquered the other city-states, and so its god had conquered their gods. Every time the Enuma Elish was recited, it reinforced this central message: Babylon's authority is not an accident of history. It is the will of the cosmos. The king of Babylon rules because he is the earthly counterpart to Marduk, the king of the gods. To rebel against Babylon was to rebel against creation itself. This story, born of political ambition and theological genius, became the foundational text of Mesopotamian culture for over 1,000 years. Its influence was immense. The central theme, a heroic storm god doing battle with a primordial sea serpent of chaos, is a trope we see echoed across the ancient Near East. The Canaanite god Baal battles the sea monster Yam. In the Hebrew Bible, Yahweh does battle with the Leviathan, a great sea dragon representing the forces of chaos. While not a direct copy, the Enuma Elish is part of a shared cultural conversation about how order is wrested from a chaotic, watery abyss. It's a story that speaks to a fundamental human fear, the fear that the universe is inherently meaningless, and that the fragile walls of our civilization could collapse back into darkness at any moment. The Enuma Elish is a declaration that they will not. It is a monument to the human drive to create order. It tells us that civilization is a deliberate act, a violent and necessary struggle against the Tiamats of the world. Order is not the default state of the universe, chaos is. Order must be fought for, established, and then tirelessly maintained. The gods did it by slaying the dragon and building the world from her corpse. And humanity, in turn, continues this fight, building cities, writing laws, and maintaining the rituals that keep the forces of chaos at bay. So, when you look up at the night sky at the predictable paths of the stars and planets, you are looking at the handiwork of Marduk. You are seeing the evidence of his victory. This is the ultimate legacy of the Enuma Elish. It's not just a story about how the world was made. It's a story about why the world was made the way it is. It's a blueprint for a civilization, a divine charter that justifies power, explains suffering, and gives meaning to existence. It is a visceral, brutal, and profoundly human attempt to stare into the abyss of primordial chaos and build a home there. It is the story of how we, the fragile children of a murdered god, first learned to make sense of the cosmos and our precarious place within it.